Welcome to the Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of non-believer who is involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have. So be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you. So, Pops, this is kind of an interesting week to be recording.
Yeah, I'm going to fight the urge to talk about the thing that everybody's talking about, at least what everybody's talking about in America. I'd say North America, but in the great scheme of things, there is less of a concern for this podcast with that sort of thing. So I think it's best if we just let it go and let the people who know better talk about it more, and the people who really know better do their jobs.
So you're talking about Trump's indictment.
Oh my gosh, I was trying not to actually say the words.
I know.
Yes.
But like people listen to this at all different, people might go back and listen to this and have no idea what we're talking about.
That's true. I could also talk about that, posy Nazi lady in the UK who's now, going full anti-trans, or I don't know, I guess there is a lot that we could talk about. She had soup thrown at her in New Zealand, I think it was.
Interesting. I wasn't even talking about any of that.
Okay, what were you talking about?
I was talking about the fact that this episode is going to be short and very possibly late because our lives have been really interesting.
That is also true.
So we were out of town for spring break a couple weeks before, and that was really fun. But right before spring break, we got notice. We've mentioned a couple of times that we're not living in the U.S. anymore. And we have been trying for dual citizenship. And we had been told that this process would take close to another year at least. So we were not even thinking about it. But right before we left for our trip, we got notice that we had to take our citizenship tests. And because we had not been expecting that notice for quite some time, we had not studied at all.
But we both passed.
We did, as of today. But so
yeah.
I was not able to think about this podcast one bit because I was just studying for the last 3 weeks.
Let's be honest. You were panicking.
I was panicking. I was also incredibly sick. We had a great spring break, and I came back and got more sick. I was thinking about this. I felt as bad as I felt when I had a miscarriage between Reader and Go and nearly bled out.
Okay, that's definitely a thing.
I was like,
that's an event that happened.
I was like, when did I feel this bad? And I was like, oh yeah, that time.
Yeah.
So that's what we've been up to. So usually I have a couple weeks to edit. I am going to try to edit this in 2 days. So if it's a little bit rougher than normal, that is why. Also because of that, I don't want a particularly long show because then I definitely won't get it done. So we're just going to discuss one topic.
Let's do it.
So I have been listening to Pardon the Mess, which is one of the Christian parenting podcasts that I started listening to at the beginning of the year. And I haven't had much to say about it because it's actually I would say it's one of the better ones. I think a lot of the advice and things they talk about, they actually cover relatively well. Mm-hmm. And that's cool, but it just means that there's not a lot to sort of dissect about it because it's pretty kind of middle of the road parenting advice, I find, for the most part. But something interesting came up that made me think. So I am going to link to the episode. I think this is the episode it is in. If it's not, I apologize. But she had a guest on to talk about raising teens. And while they were talking, I believe it was the host who brought up that as her kids were growing up, she always sought out Christian coaches for them in everything that they did, and felt like it didn't matter if it was the best team. You know, it didn't matter that she would always prefer the Christian coach over a non-Christian coach. And I thought that was so interesting. So, one, this is just an area where we will never have that opportunity. Like, I feel like people who work with kids are just, for the most part, not going to be open about their atheism. So even if we really like the idea of having positive atheist role models in our kids' lives, we would never have enough choice where we could be like, oh, I'm going for the atheist coach.
Okay.
So this is not something we could even do. But I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about, if I had that opportunity, would I do that, but on the atheist side? And I was curious what you thought.
I would prioritize my child's experience overall, their enjoyment of the process and of the execution of the skill, whether it's in like a scrimmage or a tournament or whatever. My child's growth and confidence in the skill, and just also how the growth and confidence in that skill translates to positive psychological outcomes in the rest of their life, as far as trusting themselves, feeling more motivated and confident in general, and just looking at the utility of the situation. Again, looking at what's the consequence of the child doing the thing. I don't care what the person's beliefs are. Just like I've said many times, and you've said many times, what the person believes is less important than what they do out of that belief. I care less about those religious beliefs than I do about when it comes to them practicing their skills on my child as a coach, as a teacher, and a mentor. What is it they're imparting, and how does my child receive it? And so if they have these religious beliefs and they keep them in whatever professional box they need to keep them in, then I honestly don't care. If they start proselytizing on the soccer pitch or in the gymnasium or the dance studio or whatever, then we'll be done with that coach and we'll find somebody else. Again, caring less about their religious beliefs.
Yeah. I think I 100% agree.
Cool. That's the show, folks. And, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, because I think working with kids is perhaps one of the most challenging things you can do.
100%.
Like, it is so hard to do well. And I think about one of my favorite podcasts, which is called For Crying Out Loud. And both of those moms have had kids in various different sports. And just the horror stories they've had with coaches. Just this morning, I was listening to it, and one of those stories came up again where a young coach was just like terribly oversharing with the team members and doing like really weird mean girl stuff. And, you know, I think it is really hard. I mean, I think it's hard to work with people in general. And then working with kids in an engaging way. If you can do that, that's a superpower. And so I would certainly care about those skills before anything else.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at it from a skeptical, family-oriented standpoint, as we purport this podcast to be focused on, then we're going to prioritize our kids and their experience. And if we're going to approach it from a skeptical standpoint, we're going to critically and dispassionately analyze the evidence. Mm-hmm. We're going to look at what ultimately the end result is. Because if I'm going to say, okay, we have 3 coaches and one of them is hyper religious, but yields great results with with coaching and the kids executing the skills when it comes to competition. And then you have one that never talks about religion, but is, really ineffective as a coach. And another one that never talks religion and is, moderately effective as a coach. The only reason I would not choose the more religious coach is if the coach tied the child's training and execution of the skill to some sort of set of religious dogma. Only because I don't want that for my kids. If they want that for themselves when they're older and their brains are fully developed, that is a completely different story. So for me, I would lean towards the sort of middle of the road coach, understanding that if my kids are excellent at a skill, a coach that isn't necessarily the best coach, but focuses more on the skill as being just a skill, I would prefer that, only because I would want my child to not have that exposure to religious dogma, not because I'm afraid my child is going to misread it, but because I just don't want my child exposed to it. I think it's harmful, and I don't want to support any sort of class or training structure that thinks that spreading that to a bunch of other people's kids is necessarily a good idea. And I would take the hit on maybe the quality of the coaching. But if this coach is hyper religious and we never know about that except in casual conversation with the coach, when we're not engaged in the skill and the training or execution thereof, who cares? Because from a skeptical standpoint, the end result is our kid is kicking butt in the skill and the team is doing well and the coach is effectively incorporating our child in the group activity. Our child is growing as a person and as an athlete or as an artist or whatever it is. That's what matters more. When the rubber meets the road, what do you get?
Yeah. I think it's so kid specific too, right? Because there are so many things the kids do for different reasons. So, right. Is your kid, do they just find this activity fun? And are they there for the camaraderie and to hang out and be with people who like the same thing? Or, do they, are they deeply passionate about it and want to excel to the highest level, and that's all going to really change what you're looking for in that experience.
Then at that point, I would have to have a much harder conversation with you about what would be appropriate. Like X, Y, and Z child wants to do X, Y, and Z skill at the highest possible level. The only opportunity that we have close by or within some sort of reasonable driving distance that works for our family logistically is a coach that has this sort of dubious religious background. I would have to think about that, but what I would do is I would gather data. I would go and watch the coach in action, and I would talk to the parents. And if all the parents that go there tend to agree with the coach's religious or maybe bleed over political views or cultural views that the coach maybe talks about in training, I would say to the kid, you want to do X, Y, and Z skill, we're going to have to go somewhere else. I don't care if your friends go here and like it. That's their parents' decision to do so. Because at the end of the day, like you said, it comes down to the kid. Some kids are going to be more susceptible to groupthink than others. If your child is susceptible to groupthink and you're worried about, indoctrination, your kid being exposed to religious dogma. You don't want to have to answer so many questions or have your kid be like, I want to go to my teammate's church now, sort of nonsense. You may want to consider that more heavily. But if you have like Reader and Go, I believe they're more on the critical side, even though Reader is definitely a joiner, mm-hmm. and Go likes for people to get along. Mm-hmm. He loves fairness.
And magical thinking.
And magical thinking. And all the magical thinking. I do believe that we could manage a situation where a coach had views that differ from ours wildly, and we could still make it work to a certain degree. What that degree is depends on the situation. It's all hypothetical in this conversation. We don't have thankfully, any actual data points to go with it. This is all just conjecture, right? Like, their MMA program, none of that ever comes up, because the coaches, from everything I've heard, and I've heard every single class, they're nothing but professional. They take it very seriously. Even the substitute coaches, because the substitute coaches are themselves, training for professional fights, and they want to be professional fighters, or if they're not already. So their attitude is definitely nothing other than, okay, let's train. And they go for swimming lessons at the rec center. I have never seen anything other than that. The coaches have clipboards.
They don't have time to talk about anything.
They're monitoring the kids. They don't have time. Exactly. So we've never had this. It would be more like a prolonged after school sports program as they get older, like football.
Yeah.
Or hockey or soccer or something like that, where it's a team and it's a culture and it's longer practices with more downtime, with more like coaching, as in like coach verbal interaction, trying to impart wisdom. Because the mat chats that their MMA coach gives them are great, and it's nothing but, you want to do something great in life, you have to work for it. You can't, cut any corners. All that, like the sort of basic stuff that you would expect an MMA or a boxing coach to tell a kid, which is great. And the kids love it. Reader and Go love it. And I see the results in the classes, and the kids, generally speaking, take every class and training very, very seriously. And I say that as somebody who used to teach kids, that it's admirable. They do a very good job. We are very lucky in a very Catholic part of the world that we don't have people talking about the evils of abortion in the middle of like a wrestling class.
Yeah.
It's good. We're very fortunate.
I was thinking, I think to me, if we found a great coach and they were somehow open about being an atheist, that would just be like icing on the cake, because there aren't many, and it would be cool to have that role model. But
we like as secular folks, we don't like, because our worldviews aren't defined by the fact that we don't have God beliefs. Right? Like we don't enter a conversation talking about this defining theistic position. At least I've talked to a lot of secular people online and in person, just because it interests me, and I've done like online, conversation and debate with both sides of the fence about all sorts of things. And with the secular folks, unless they're a secular person, or it's in a forum where you are like, where you have to identify what your position is on a certain topic. Mm-hmm. I've found that secular folks don't come out and say it. And could that be because of stigma? Perhaps, but I think a lot of it has to do with, we just generally don't go around thinking about gods a lot. And so when we talk about stuff, we don't frame it like that, you know, like,
Yeah.
and our social lives aren't defined by that. Our time isn't punctuated by religious ceremonies. So it's just not at the front of our minds.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's another reason that this would not even be an option, because even if there was an atheist coach, you wouldn't necessarily know. And
I think if you come out and say, hey, are you atheist? What are they? I mean, like that's
no,
weird.
And I wouldn't do that. That's not what I'm saying. But I think because of that, and I agree, like the only thing that being an atheist tells you about somebody is that they don't believe in God. It's not a belief system, so it doesn't tell you anything else. And so
it's an answer to a claim.
Right. But I think that's what I was saying. If I found somebody who was really great for reasons that did have to do with things I agreed with, right? Because they were good at talking to kids in a way they could understand and supportive and creative and all of those things. If that did come up for some reason, I would think of it as icing on the cake, only because since most people don't talk about it, I think as kids growing up in an atheist family, we're like, they know how we feel, right? They know that you and I don't believe in God. I think they could feel very different in that way. And not in a bad way, but it's easy to feel alone in that when the only people who do talk about things are religious.
Right.
You know? Yeah. So that's the only reason that I would say it's icing on the cake, because it's just another data point of like, oh yeah, there are other cool people who feel this way. And I know there are, but they're probably not going to see that in their life for quite a while until they're older and have friends who might have similar feelings.
I get it. You know what? I think you're more concerned about this than I am, because I just want my kids to be happy and productive.
I don't think I'm concerned about it. I wouldn't even search it out. I'm saying if it came up, I'd be like, oh, that's cool.
I agree. Yes, that would be interesting. But yeah, I am like, that is so far down my list of priorities when it comes to deciding a program for my kids, that if it does happen, it would be more like I would go, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know what? The person who's running the program wouldn't talk about it either, most likely. Because if that person running the program comes out and starts talking to all the kids about how God doesn't exist and religion is silly or religious people are crazy, I would pull my kid out of that program too.
Yeah. Right.
For the same exact reason, because I don't want my kids having some sort of dogmatic approach to life where they prioritize their opinion or making some sort of echo chamber out of their life over practicing empathy and cooperation.
Well, I think it also just speaks to the person as a coach, because if you are, then you're not creating an environment
mind and a fragile ego, and somebody who prioritizes their own feelings over like the sanctity. I say that in a secular way, the sanctity of the training environment.
Yeah.
That when the kids are there, even if they are not there to become the next greatest whatever in the world, they need to be given the opportunity to make that decision for themselves. And if the training environment is punctuated by the coach's opinions about all sorts of things that have nothing to do with the training, then that is not the most productive training environment. And I don't care if your kid is that motivated to be the next great whatever. Your kid should be in a training environment where they have the opportunity to do so. Like our kids, they talk about wanting to be MMA fighters or whatever now, amongst all the other things they want to be when they grow up. But that's because they are in a culture that includes professional fighters. And they have role models who are themselves professional and kind and effective and strong and determined. And that is what they are emulating, I am convinced. Not the, get down to brass tacks. Do you really want to get beat up all the time for very little money unless you get to be really, really, really successful? They probably aren't, because it's just a matter of the odds of a person's mindset. A fighter's mindset is a very specific, rare thing. That said, if they grow up and they stay in this training environment that has these people that they still look up to, but they change what their goals are in their training or the outcomes in their lives, the environment itself still has the same utility, because they are amongst people that are very goal-oriented and motivated. That is good regardless of what you are doing. And they're going to be in a culture of people that push themselves and each other to new heights regardless of what the individual's goals are for their training. And so that's what I would look for in a very large nutshell in anything that the kids do. The only other thing I wanted to bring up is I was intrigued by just the assumption that if someone professes the same faith as you, that they are going to live up to those values and be the kind of person that you want working with your kids. Yeah, it's too general. It comes down to sects and denominations.
Well, no, and I would say that the host knew that and was talking about very specific sects. But even if...
Sects, CTS audience, not SEX.
But...
Of course.
I think, even if I thought a religion was totally true and the one real religion, just... Even in that instance, I don't think you can assume that everyone who professes a belief in it is going to live up to the ideals of it, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like, even if somebody professed very similar feelings to me, like we've said, atheism isn't a belief system, but if I knew they agreed about other things, it doesn't... people are complex, and it doesn't mean that you can necessarily trust them to actually live by whatever values they profess. It seems like I feel like it's easy to feel safety when you're with somebody who's, saying the same kind of things you think. But I have found that it's kind of just as easy to be disappointed by those people as anybody else.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, it comes down to what are the consequences of that person having that belief? What do they do because of it? So yeah, I love that you brought this up, but I think we're going to start talking in circles, because I think that we basically said what we wanted to say.
The only other thing I would say is that in the end, I just felt a little bit sad for her. I'm sure her kids had wonderful experiences with the coaches they were with. And she certainly seems happy with the choices. But, I kind of wonder about the awesome experiences they could have had with people with a broader perspective. And I do think it's funny to hear that concern coming from somebody where there's basically, like we said, atheists are not going to talk about this. So there's it was funny coming from her, where I feel like she had basically like a 1% chance of a coach professing something diametrically opposed to their worldview in a coaching session. Whereas people like us, as we discussed a lot here, have like a much higher chance of having somebody profess something where we would have to really question it and think about how to deal with it. So it was just interesting having sort of the max concern come from somebody where I feel like she had the least likelihood of having to worry about it.
Yeah, the concerns that American Christians have are generally, I find very interesting because Christianity, regardless of your denomination or your political views, Christianity is hegemonic, whatever. I forget how you pronounce it. In America, it is the absolutely dominant religion, and it permeates all aspects of government.
Yeah.
All three branches. And, obviously you will find Christians that align with you on some issues and Christians that are opposed to you on other issues, or, we all know this as secular folks. But the victim mentality, the constant concern about curating, I think I should use that word, curating your child's life so that all that they experience is Christian, for fear that if they don't, something bad is going to happen. I just think it is a big missed opportunity to actually progress society, because we all have to live together, whether or not you want to admit that secularism is on the rise, or that Jews exist, or there are Muslim neighbors. You're going to be faced with that inevitably, that truth. And so isn't it better to just equip your kids? It just seems like a missed opportunity for parenting, right? Like they have this strong view on what is and is not effective parenting. I'd say that indicts their opinion about what is and is not effective parenting.
Well,
I'm sorry, that is a really big deal. Teaching your children to avoid a whole segment of the country. And that includes every other religion and secularism.
I'm not going to go so far to say that she specifically chose that option when she had it, that in other ways she was encouraging her kids to avoid other people. I think that's a jump, and the conversation was not broad enough to go there.
That's not what I said. I didn't say she encouraged them. What I said is she intentionally deprived them because of her anxiety. She's teaching her children to have an anxiety about this topic. It's subtle, but she's conditioning her children to not do anything other than, okay, you have to go for the Christian option. Because that's not only a missed opportunity, that is the sort of thing that conservative Christians, especially in America, accuse progressive Christianity and secularism of doing to children in public schools for all sorts of different reasons. Giving them one viewpoint that's not the correct viewpoint, air quotes. And I just think that we live in a pluralistic society, and avoiding that truth in favor of a fear-based response or some sort of emotional, social, cultural purity response. It's just, I don't think it's effective parenting. I think it's sticking your head in the sand, sticking your fingers in your ears, la, 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 all that.
Interesting. Well, I think we should really close it out there.
Okay, great. Nice. Ended on a negative.
I do my best.
But hey, you know what? Trump got indicted.
Yeah, there we go.
There's the punchline.
So,
circle back to the top of the joke.
Always. So, let's see. As always, we have to thank Jonathan Zalbin and First Frame Music for the music for this podcast.
Yeah, and this wraps up yet another wonderfully fun episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids. Just at the top, I'm hearing a bit of a hum from your microphone. I don't know why, but it's there.
Well, I just don't think this is a day where we're going to fix that.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm just telling you just so you're not surprised.
Okay.